This is Jeremy Kubicek from Giant Worldwide. And if you want to maximize your potential for success, then I would recommend highly for you to subscribe to the Success is a Choice podcast.
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler, and today we have Kevin Deshazo on the podcast. Kevin is the founder of Fieldhouse Media, a business that educates student athletes on social media use. He is also the author of iAthlete, Impacting Student Athletes of a Digital Generation, as well as his newest book, Leadership Interrupted, Daily Inspiration to Become the Leader You Were Meant to Be. Kevin has also partnered with Giant Worldwide and Jeremy Kubicek, who we interviewed on episode 15. And together they help teams build championship cultures. It is our pleasure to have Kevin on the show today. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Well, for those of the people maybe tuning in today that aren't as familiar with your work, kind of give our listeners a snapshot of your background, kind of where your journey has taken you through the years.
Yeah, so I graduated from Oklahoma State University with a degree in management information systems that I've yet to use to this day, which is okay, but got into the healthcare space and then got into the social media space. And that started when I was in healthcare recruiting, using social media to recruit healthcare professionals, kind of realized it was a bigger deal than, pictures of my aunt's cat, that there was something to this social media thing. And this is probably, 07, 08-ish. So pre-Twitter, just really using Facebook. Then Twitter came out. I immediately got addicted to it as a sports fan because now I had access to athletes, to coaches, to these people that I idolized, I guess is the best way to put it. And I remember having an interaction with a pro athlete at one point, James Harden, who played for the Thunder at the time here in Oklahoma City. They were going to play in Houston, and he asked for restaurant recommendations or something. And I responded, because I had just gotten back from a conference there. Hey, you need to go to this place. We went there 3 times in 4 days. It's amazing. And he replied back. And something clicked. I'm like, holy cow, we have access. We've never had access like this to quote unquote influencers in any field. So I got hooked on social media, left the healthcare world, started my own healthcare recruiting company that failed miserably, made a total of $0 in a year, which is not great business. But just kind of kept an eye on the sports space as a sports fan. That's really what I was using Twitter for, was as a sports fan. And I just kept noticing student athletes getting in trouble as it relates to social media. And so I just kind of kept complaining to friends that something needs to be done. There needs to be a conversation. It doesn't have to be so negative for student athletes. They can use it well. It's actually really beneficial for them if they use it well. It's beneficial for their team, for the program, for the university. Someone needs to show them what that looks like. And so I complained enough that friends said either stop complaining or do something about it. So I did something about it, started Fieldhouse Media, and used Twitter specifically. I didn't have any contacts in the sports world. I was just a fan with a Twitter account, but used Twitter to connect with ADs, SIDs, compliance, whoever I could find, to build Fieldhouse Media. And so we've been on a number of campuses over the past 6 years. That was in 2011, so I guess 7 years. That led into just a passion of mine has always been leadership. And so a couple years ago, started sending a daily email to leaders in college athletics, and then ended up, as you said, partnering with Jeremy Kubicek and Giant Worldwide. They do global leadership development with companies like Leidos Lockheed Martin, Air Force Academy, Chick-fil-A, Delta, British Foreign Office. And so learning their system, their content, their mindset, and now bringing that into the sports world to head up their sports division called Culture Wins Championships.
So you mentioned you did Fieldhouse Media. You started that about 7 years ago, and you've been on more than 140 campuses. You've educated more than 90,000 students, coaches, administrators. What do you see that are kind of the needs that Fieldhouse Media is addressing and meeting at this point?
Yeah, I think, and it's changed. So, right, in 2011, social media was still really new. I mean, Facebook had been around for 7 years at that point. But it was still really new, and people didn't understand social media. Administrators didn't understand social media, which is why there was so much fear and negativity around it. That student athletes are too irresponsible, they're too immature, they can't be trusted, we need to ban them from using it. And most of that came from either ignorance of just not understanding social media, or just this need for control that people have. They want to control, especially coaches. They want to control everything. They want no distractions. They want everything neat and tidy, so the players can focus on the task at hand, at practice, at games, whatever. And so that was kind of the way it was in 2011. It was a lot of fear, and so having to sell into that fear by countering that, saying no, this is actually a really good thing. And on some level, we had to sell that this is a protection thing. Hey, if you educate your athletes on how to use this, you're actually protecting yourself and the players, and which is true. But I didn't like selling to that fear, because I think social media is a great thing. So now, fast forward 7 years. Obviously, Twitter is ingrained in our society. Now we have Instagram and we have Snapchat, all these different platforms that some come and go. And social media is now the norm. And so now your kids are now coming on to campus. They may have, depending on the school, they may have 1 million followers. They may have 10,000 followers. Whereas in 2011, maybe they had 200. So they're coming to campus with these eyeballs on them. How can you help them utilize that to their advantage? As an individual and as a student athlete today, but as they move into a career in or out of sports in the future. And we've falsely believed that because social media has now been around for a decade, that kids understand how to use it. Well, they've been on Twitter for 7 years at this point, or Facebook for 8 years, or Instagram for 2 or 3 years. They get it now. It's like, well, no, they're still 18, 19 years old. Just because they've been using these platforms doesn't mean they are experts in these platforms. Doesn't mean they know what it means to build a personal brand. They're still mostly using it to communicate with their friends, which is not inherently wrong or bad, but that's how mistakes happen when we don't realize the size of our audience who's actually watching us. And so it's almost having to re-educate administrators and coaches, say, hey, I know they've been on it for a long time. Now this is a tool you really have to be intentional to equip them to use as a student athlete, as an individual. It's a recruiting tool. If you can help them, hey, we know that you're only going to be here for 4 years. We want to set you up for success as you leave. Well, now social media is a part of that. And so it's one of those things that student athletes are looking at, and parents are looking at. How are you going to equip my son or daughter for success? It's not just football or basketball or volleyball. It's not just the classroom. It's these life skills. And now social media in our world, you have to understand how to use it.
So when you deal with coaches or administrators, are there some practical tips that you really like to hammer home with them or give them to equip them to, meet the students where they're at and use social media in the right way and use it as a tool as opposed to maybe a weapon? But are there some tips that you would give coaches?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is having a purpose. Right? Why are you going to be on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook? What do you want from it? Because coaches now feel the pressure that they have to be there, and there's an argument both ways. Of course, I tend to lean to the side that you should be there, you should have a presence, but the question is why? What is your goal? Is it a recruiting tool? Is it a PR and branding tool? Is it a culture tool where you showcase the kind of players that you have, the kind of program that you have? Do you want to talk about your family? Because you hear from coaches all the time, well, nobody needs to know that I'm at the grocery store eating lunch. I'm like, well, you're right. They don't want to know that. They don't care to know that. So don't post that, right? You have control over this. This is your media outlet that you have full control and power over. So why? What story do you want to tell? Why do you want to use it? What do you want people to know? I've had coaches say, "Man, I was just raised in an era where you just don't talk about yourself, and it feels like that's all social media is." I'm like, no, that's great. We need more people like you. We need more people who talk about other people. So highlight your team, highlight your players, talk about the work they're putting in, the results, the character of the people that you have on your team. So it just goes back to why, and that's for anyone, not just coaches or administrators or players, but any individual. Why are you on Twitter? Why are you on Facebook? Why are you on Instagram? What do you want from it? What can you give to it? And that kind of defines then how you get to use it. So it's essentially reverse engineering. This is what I want from it. This is why I'm on it. So now what does the behavior look like for me to make that reality? So for me, when I first got on Twitter, it certainly wasn't for business. I was just a sports fan. I had no real purpose. And so I just added noise all day long. I would tweet about anything and everything, and nobody cared what I had to say. When I sort of started to change, say, wait a minute, no, this is what I want to be known for, especially in this space, social media and sports, social media and athletes, business, leadership. when I kind of started to change and have those as my kind of core buckets, so to speak, then my content started to change. Well, I want to add value on this topic by talking about this. Well, then people start to know me for those things, and they start to care about what I'm saying. Or if they don't care, they can unfollow me if those things aren't of interest. But that allows me to give value and to get value and to build a brand. And again, not everyone has to have the same goal that I do, of course, but it's what's the point? So my wife, for example, doesn't like Twitter. There's no real point for her to be on Twitter, so she doesn't use it. Instagram is a big deal. She uses it for business. She uses it for family. So everything for me goes back to why. What is your purpose? If you don't have a purpose, you don't need to be on a platform because you're going to be really terrible at it. And I'd rather you have zero presence than a terrible presence.
When you deal with students about social media, is there kind of an aha moment that you see or where it kind of clicks in their mind about, what their perspective of social media is and maybe where it should be, or that they can actually use it from a positive standpoint and use it as a tool maybe to promote themselves or to promote their brand?
Yeah, in our session, and these are sessions that student athletes typically don't want to come to. They're college kids. They don't want to go to quote unquote life skills sessions. And the messages they've heard about social media are typically pretty irrelevant, right? It's someone talking to them, maybe about Facebook, maybe about MySpace, maybe about instant messenger. I mean, I've heard of coaches and administrators and outside consultants having those conversations, in the last couple of years. It's like, okay, well, that's not helpful. So they don't want to come to these sessions, which I get. And so for them, I want to come in and say, no, I'm not here to talk about how bad, negative, and dangerous it is, although we certainly need to talk about the risks. But I love social media. I've gotten to travel the country because of social media. So I'm here to help you understand how great it actually can be. And so there's this click point where so kind of the framework of our sessions is here's what social media is, which sounds like a weird way to start a conversation because, again, they've been on it forever, but that doesn't mean they get how big it is. So kind of laying this foundation of here's what social media is, here's what it's doing in the world, here's how the media covers you, no matter what school you're at. If you're at a Power 5 program or an NAIA program, somebody's still watching you. You're still going to make headlines because those negative headlines get clicks. So here's how the media is covering you. And then I always pull up the worst tweets I can find from the program that I'm at. And I blur out their names because I'm not trying to humiliate or shame them. And they also know who they are. I mean, they recognize their own tweets. They all follow each other. And so at that moment, they laugh for a few minutes because, again, they're 18, 19 years old. That's funny to them. And then they realize, like, wait a minute, I don't know this guy. And I don't follow them. I didn't get a list of their Twitter handles from any administrator. I went just on Twitter and found their Twitter handles and found their tweets in a matter of 5 minutes. And I'm a complete stranger. And so then I ask him, we're here to have fun. We're here to learn. Imagine I'm an employer and he turns his computer screen around. You thankfully made it to the interview. And then he turns his computer screen around and says, hey, is this you? Then suddenly it's not that funny of a moment. Life just got pretty real and you've got no way out of it. And so you can just see, like, all of a sudden all that laughter and it goes to dead silence in a matter of seconds. Like, oh, I didn't realize anyone could see. I thought I was just joking with my friends. I didn't. And so for a lot of them, it's, I just need to be private. No, private's not the answer because there's nothing private on the internet. The answer is to use it better. And so then telling stories of student athletes that we've worked with, just people in general who have used social media as not superstars, not the star athlete, just general people like you and I who have used social media to build a successful platform, to get jobs. So showing them what success can actually look like and that social media, is it fun? Yes, but it's not a toy. Like, it's nothing to mess around with. It can have a really significant impact on your life. You get to choose whether that's a positive or a negative impact.
Absolutely. And you make a great point there. Tell a story, form kind of a narrative around what you want people to know about you. And as an athlete, you can praise your teammates, you can praise your coaches, you can praise the opponent and demonstrate, or paint a picture of what you're like and use it as a tool, like you said. You wrote a book that was similar to this, your first book, iAthlete, Impacting Student Athletes of a Digital Generation. Would you say the same thing to parents as you would coaches with dealing with their kids? Because sometimes there's not a great understanding of, kids nowadays, or, there's a disconnect between parents and kids sometimes. Would you have the same kind of advice for parents of dealing with kids when they're on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're 100% right in that part of the issue, whether it's coaches, administrators, or parents, again, goes back to this lack of knowledge, lack of information, lack of understanding about social media. And they'll say, well, I'm just not a social media expert. This is just, I don't understand all this stuff. Well, A, there is no such thing as a social media expert. B, you spend a lot more time on social media than you realize. You've been on social media probably longer than your kids have. But you need to be having conversations. Your lack of understanding is an excuse to not have a conversation. You don't hand your kids when they turn 16, hey, here's the keys, good luck. And then wonder why they got in a wreck with no training, with no conversation, with no understanding. No, we go through training. They go through driver's ed. They practice, they study, and we walk alongside them until we know that they are ready. I think the same thing is true of social media, maybe even to a larger extent, right? Because it's with one press of a button, they've sent a message that it doesn't matter if they have 42 followers. The entire world that has internet can see what they've posted, and no kid is ready for that. But I mean, I certainly wasn't in high school, definitely not in middle school, probably not most of college. I just wasn't ready for that. And so I think with parents, and I challenge parents to do this when we do sessions, especially like a church setting or a local high school setting where parents can come get involved. You need to be reading at least one article a week on social media. You don't have to be an expert. Just understand. Go on Mashable and read one article a week. Google social media teens and see what pops up. See what stories are out there, so you can have real conversation with your kids. Say, hey, is this an app that you use? How are you using it? How do you feel about that app? Well, did you know that this person at this school, they thought that was private too? And here's the reality. I think parents have, and again, obviously generalizing here, I think they've just kind of tossed their hands up and let it go. And it's just, I think that's really, really dangerous. My kids, I've got a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old, and I love social media, but we're going to have some really, really serious conversations about social media use, about what apps they can use, what apps they can't use, because parents just, they don't know. And it's amazing to see the look on their faces when I talk about sexting on Snapchat, or that Snapchat isn't private, and they have no clue any of this stuff even exists. I'm like, well, you gave your kid the keys to a Ferrari, and there's no conversation with that. There's no monitoring with that. We have to be a lot more intentional with that as parents, but also as coaches. But parents, we've got to be having conversations at a really young age, because this is becoming, my 9-year-old, there are kids in his school who are already getting phones. I got a message from a friend locally, hey, the third graders at our school are having some issues on Instagram. Will you come talk to the school? I said, yeah, that'll be a short conversation. Please don't let your kids on Instagram when they're 9 years old. What is wrong with you? Because there's just no reason a 9-year-old should be on Instagram. And so parents have to start taking ownership of these things.
Well, and you're right too. I mean, they have to educate them, and they have to act like, this isn't going away. So they can't just turn their head or bury their head in the sand and think that it's a fad, or hope that it doesn't happen to them. It's here to stay, and they've got to try to educate both their kid, but they got to educate themselves first. You're absolutely right on that, Kevin. And coaching's not easy. Being a leader's not easy. Being a parent's not easy. But just like as a coach, you got to find out what motivates your players and kind of use that as a tool. The same way with your kids, if you're a parent, what's motivating your kid? What do they want? What are some of their goals and dreams? And then try to use that, as you said, show them some examples. Maybe they don't even think about their future employers looking at that, or a coach is looking at that, and they're going to lose out on a scholarship. And
you're right. And we, as adults, as administrators, as parents and coaches and teachers, we keep wondering, the question I keep hearing, why is this still happening? Right? Why are they still making these mistakes? And this has been going on. You shouldn't have a job anymore. You've been doing this for 7 years. Well, no, number one, they don't read the same news that we do, right? Kids aren't going out and looking for news about kids making mistakes on social media. They're not thinking about their employers. They just generally aren't thinking about the big picture. And so the more we can help them see what the big picture actually looks like, about how what they're doing today will impact that for better or worse, then we can start to have real conversations. And as you said, the kids don't expect their parents to be experts on social media, but I think they do expect their parents to care and have a conversation and be present in that. And that's how we start to see change, to have meaningful conversation just by being present. And even as a parent, hey, tell me about that app. Show me how that works. Why do you use that? do you see any risks with that? Is anybody using that in a poor way? The more we can ask questions, we can start to trigger those things in our kids' minds. Like, wait a minute, I never really thought of that. So as parents, we just have to be engaged with that.
We'll return to our conversation with Kevin Deshazo shortly. He has a heart and passion for helping students learn life skills. He wants to help students develop. In the same way, I wanted to mention a resource that goes hand in hand with some of the things that Kevin is doing. The Leadership Playbook is packed full of practical insights and stories. Frederick Douglass once said that it's easier to build strong children than it is to prepare broken men. This book can help student athletes learn how to be better leaders and positive teammates. You see, when we help develop today's students, we also help influence the future. So please visit theleadershipplaybook.com to learn more about this impactful book. And now back to more insights from Kevin Deshazo. Well, you recently came out with a new book entitled Leadership Interrupted, Daily Inspiration to Become the Leader You Were Meant to Be. Why did this book get written? Why did you decide to write this book, and kind of why does it stand out? Why should our readers or our listeners go to the show notes, click on the link, and go buy this book?
Great question. Because why do we need another leadership book, right? There's only 14 million of them out there. I think, so the genesis of the book was, so again, 3 or 4 years ago, I started having these thoughts about leadership and didn't know what to do with it. And so I started, at the time, what was called Fieldhouse Leadership, and sent out a daily email designed for people in college sports, or intended, since that's kind of generally the area that I play in. But then people in pro sports and high school sports and all these other industries started signing up. And it was just a daily challenge. And honestly, a lot of it was for me. So I'm processing through my own issues, my own failures, my own thoughts, things that I need to get better at, and just sharing those with people, hoping that it would change their mindset as they entered the day. Oh, I never thought about fear that way, or I never thought about insecurity that way, or I never thought about asking my team this question. So it's just meant to be a daily challenge to get you into a different mindset instead of just going through the motions each day. And so I've been doing that, I think, since probably 2014, I believe. And so people kept saying, hey, you should turn this into a book. You should turn this into a book. And so eventually I said, great. So I sat down this summer and decided might as well. So I took what I hoped are the 365 best of those 1,300 plus emails, and turned it into, almost for lack of better terminology, a daily leadership devotional. And I changed a lot of the verbiage. So the book is not designed for people in the sports world, even though the emails typically are. The book is for anyone. I mean, if you're a teacher, if you're a janitor, if you're a CEO, if you're an HR, if you're a receptionist, if you're a stay-at-home mom, whatever that looks like, I think leadership is for all of us. It's not for people with leader in their title or who sit in a certain office. It's for each of us. What's really fun is I heard a story this week of a high school class, freshmen, who are going through the book as a study, which kind of blows my mind. And so I think that's what differentiates it. It's not a bunch of big picture ideas that sound really fun and sound really great and sound really energizing, but it's these daily things that you can do that make leadership really practical. And if you do them, if it's this journey that we're all on, and it's never over. But if you start to implement some of these things, and we'll start to see real change in our lives, in the people around us, in the culture of our team, of our family. So just a daily practical way for people to get better.
And we'll put that link to that book in the show notes so you can go check that out as well, and go ahead and order that. We mentioned in the intro you partnered with Jeremy Kubicek, Giant Worldwide, and you guys have Culture Wins Championships, which goes out, helps teams and organizations learn how to create and build a better culture. Talk a little bit about that and what you see as key characteristics to a strong culture in teams.
Yeah, so we, Jeremy had been a mentor and friend for a number of years. My wife had worked for him in the past, and as he was putting on these huge events like Catalyst and Chick-fil-A LeaderCast and all these massive leadership events, kind of realized that leadership needs to look different. It's not an event. It's a process. It's a transformation. And so he was in London, kind of rebuilding what they renamed Giant. Used to be Giant Partners, and then Giant Impact became Giant Worldwide. And so he partnered with a guy named Steve Cockram over in London, who's heading up kind of the European team. And then he was moving back and showed me what they were doing. And I said, this is incredible. I need this as a man, dad, husband. I've been doing this thing in the college sports space, this field house leadership thing. People are asking for staff retreats for leadership stuff, and I can't do it. How do we play together? So he said, great. Well, let's just have field house leadership powered by Giant Worldwide. And then last year, we rebranded field house leadership as Culture Wins Championships. And the idea for that actually came from, I was reading an article. I don't know why I read this article, probably just came through my Twitter feed, but it was in a Tampa Bay newspaper about Tony Dungy and his time with the Buccaneers, and how when they came in, the Buccaneers were arguably the worst team in professional sports in history. I mean, they were just consistently terrible. He comes in, and a week or two in, they're like, why aren't you out practicing? Because the guys were doing other things. He was meeting with them one-on-one, getting to know the guys, doing some, I don't want to say team building stuff because that sounds cliche, but doing some team building culture type stuff. And somebody said, why aren't the guys practicing? I said, look, man, football is not the issue. These guys have been playing football since they're 4 years old. It's not about running routes or blocking. Like they know that it's about culture. It's about knowing each other. It's about trusting each other. That's what we've got to work on if we want to be a successful team. A couple years later, they win the Super Bowl. So they go from not just being the worst team in history to winning the Super Bowl. And so I'm sitting at a red light, and I had this thought of Culture Wins Championships. I was like, that's a great company. That's a great book name. So I went, nobody owned the domain. So I bought the domain real quick. Well, pulled over from a red light, bought the domain real quick, texted Jeremy and said, I think I have an idea. I'd say we rebrand Fieldhouse Leadership as Culture Wins Championships. He said, great. So it's been really fun to take what Giant is doing, again, with companies like Delta and Chick-fil-A and the Air Force Academy and Lockheed Martin and Leidos and British Foreign Office, down to small local businesses, dentist office, screen printing companies, payroll companies, nonprofits, and saying, what would this look like in the sports space? And so reframing a lot of their content, rewriting a lot of their content to relate to student athletes, to relate to administrators, to relate to front office executives. And so it's been really fun to build that while I'm still doing Fieldhouse Media, but to start to build Culture Wins Championships and to really start to see change in the leadership culture in American sports. And so I think when you talk about characteristics of a strong culture, because it's one of those buzzwords that I think it's always tough to nail down, and it means a couple different things, right? There's culture of like cultural sensitivities. Like if you grew up in the Bronx, your view on culture and people and life is going to be different than if you grew up in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So if you're going to recruit a basketball player from the Bronx to Oklahoma State, there are some cultural issues that you're going to have to be aware of and to work through intentionally. So there's that kind of culture, which does matter in teams because you're going to have people from all around the country. But there's also just the organizational health, which is obviously what we're talking about when we talk about culture. Is what's it like for people to operate within your team, within your organization? Do they wake up excited each morning? Is there purpose? Is there vision? Is it toxic? Is it drama? Is it gossip? What is the environment that your team operates in, or as Jeremy would call it, it's like a greenhouse? And are people thriving, or are they starving and having no oxygen, no water, and everything's dying? So I think the key characteristics of that are a few things. Number one, trust. Do your people trust each other? We live in a very competitive world, not just sports, but American culture in general is very, very competitive. It's a winner takes all mindset. Well, if I think the person next to me is out for their own good and not the good of the team, then I'm probably not going to trust them. So is there trust in a team? Is there communication? Do I know how that person naturally operates? When they speak, do I hear them correctly? Do I know how to speak to people? Can I connect with them in what we would call their own leadership voice? Can I cut through all of the cultural issues and connect with them in a relevant way? Do I know how to support and challenge people? Are people being held accountable to a really high standard, but also given what they need to reach that standard? And then are people self-aware? Most people go through life just not knowing who they are and why. So people can know their natural strengths, their natural weaknesses, and the same things of their team. Then we can all start to play at our strengths. We can make our weaknesses less of a liability and start to lead ourselves and start to change ourselves as opposed to putting change on everyone else. So again, we talk about culture. I think those are some of the key things, but culture is just this big fuzzy word. And I think people, we call it a buzzword, or we call it this really awkward thing as an excuse to not create it. If we say it's just a really weird thing, then we're not accountable to create a culture. We can just kind of, oh, it's just a weird thing. We don't talk about culture here. Well, then you're not going to have a great culture. And so I think if we just be honest about what it is, acknowledge that it is a real thing, and then acknowledge that it's our responsibility to create it, then we can show up in a meaningful way. And that's for not just leaders creating culture, the leader of the team, but everyone on the team.
Well, you gave us some great insights there on key characteristics, just kind of flipping it around. Is there maybe one thing that's overwhelming or overarching when you go work with teams that you see that's a flaw, that's a weakness that these people have with their culture, maybe that's just holding them back? And it seems to be across the board. Nearly every team or organization you work with seems to have this fault. Is there one that's above everything else maybe?
There's actually two that come to mind that I see consistently. One is communication. So I had a conversation with a coach yesterday, actually, trying to work through some issues with their team. And I could just tell in talking with her that communication with the team, knowing her personality and knowing kind of the general makeup of the team that she works with, like, she's not a bad person. She has no ill intent, but I could tell that she is being completely misheard by her team. So there's a direct communication breakdown, not because she's not screaming, yelling at people. She's just wired differently than most people on her team, and they don't get it. And she doesn't get it because she doesn't know herself. So I think communication is a huge thing. The other thing that comes to light pretty often is insecurity. Insecurity and self-preservation. So it feels like everyone's trying to prove themselves, or they're afraid of being found out that they're not good enough, they don't deserve the position. And when we try to prove ourselves, we just do things we wouldn't normally do. Or if we're afraid of losing, we do things that we wouldn't normally do. And so a lot of the toxicity that I see in teams is rooted in that insecurity. So if you can just have a leader that's okay giving up control, instead of trying to fight to keep everything, because if someone else steps up and shows that they can lead, well, maybe they're a threat to me. No, they're not a threat to you. That's what you should be doing. You should be developing other leaders. It should be taken off of your plate because you've got a team full of leaders. It doesn't have to be all on your shoulders. So I think insecurity and self-preservation really come out quite a bit, especially in the sports culture.
Which is a really interesting concept because, I see this when I work with teams as well. You're dead on, is that a coach is, from the leadership standpoint, there's a different dynamic there with coaches wanting to give up control of that, or, having that insecurity, but they're able to give up control in the weight room with strength coaches and give up control with athletic trainers. Even though a coach can tape an ankle, they still allow the trainers to do that and those kind of things. So I see that insecurity as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic. And so that nobody wants to face that. But if they do, then they can start to get healthy and actually have a healthy culture.
Yeah, and that communication thing is great, and people forget that it takes more than just one-sided communication. So it's not just if you think you communicate it clearly. It's did they understand what your message was?
Absolutely.
Kevin, where can people best connect with you or reach out to you or learn about what you're doing?
Yeah, on Twitter, it's at Kevin Deshazo, KevinDeshazo. Same thing on Instagram. Fieldhouse Media is at Fieldhouse Media or fieldhousemedia.net. And then Culture Wins Championships is at Culture Wins or culturewinschampionships.com.
Well, we'll put those in the show notes so people can go and check out the great things that you're doing. Kevin, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Those insights were really good. We have a lot of coaches, a lot of administrators, leaders, and even parents that are listening to this show. So hopefully that spurred some thoughts in their minds about how they can best deal with social media.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time.
I hope that you enjoyed those insights from Kevin Deshazo. He is doing so much to help the youth in our country today and how they utilize social media in a responsible way. Thanks for being a loyal listener to our podcast as well. And if you're just joining us for the first time, then welcome. And we would love for you to catch all of our future episodes by taking just a quick second to hit that little subscribe button. Thanks, and until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?